Coming up on Good Journeys with Ben Veal.
You know, we can often have a picture in our heads of what someone who in prison looks like. And just to even challenge that is, I think, can be quite helpful. And looking at the terminology that we use and how are we putting an identity onto someone? And therefore, what is that doing to them? Because I think when we start labeling people, it's very hard for them to move on from that label.
Welcome to Good Journeys with Ben Veal, the show that explores the trails traveled and lessons learned from some truly incredible people.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to Good Journeys with me, your host, Ben Veal from Second Mountain Comms. Now, all of us have made missteps in our own personal journeys. I know I certainly have. But should the mistakes of our past define our future? My guest joining me today is a purpose-driven founder who believes that everyone should be given a fair chance to work, grow and thrive, regardless of their past. Her specialist consultancy business breaks down misconceptions around hiring someone with a criminal conviction by educating and empowering organisations and businesses. And its leader trainer will be talking to me today about why that is so important in our world. My guest today is Esther Champion from Myrtos Consultancy. Esther, welcome to Good Journeys. How are you?
Hi, thank you. I'm good, thank you. I'm good. Definitely enjoying the sunshine today.
Oh, thank heavens, long overdue. As we're recording this, it's kind of mid-June. We're finally in a heat wave. Let's hope this is the start of many, many months ahead of this now, because it's been a long winter.
It has. I love how it's our heat wave.
Yeah, absolutely. We're owning this, aren't we? We're owning the nice weather.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, I'm so pleased you could be here today. I saw you speak in a panel discussion a few months ago now at Purpose Fest 2024. And, you know, I reached out to you because for a personal reason, the work you're doing really touches me on a personal level. For a bit of context, my dad, who I lost last year, he worked for many years for the DWP as a disability employment and pensions advisor. And I know how much that role would mean to him. He used to always come back and talk to me about some of his days and the experiences he'd have, and nothing brought him greater joy than helping a former prisoner kind of find meaningful work in the outside world. So I think what you're doing is awesome, and I'm really excited to kind of unpick it a bit today.
Thanks. Yeah, I love that you have such fond memories of your dad and what he did, because that kind of says to me that he really cared. Like that compassion for the people that he met in prison obviously really shone through to you. So yeah, that's just really when I remember when you told me about that, I was kind of really touched by that. So that's just a really wonderful story to hear, actually. So
I think also for him, because he was a special constable for many years. I think he also had a better context in terms of why people might find themselves in prison or why people might be offending, and so he always saw them as the people they were rather than the circumstance that had befallen them.
Yeah, I think that's a really kind of important point actually to think about, is that a lot of people end up in prison partly because of circumstances they find themselves in or even born into. Like I don't think people wake up, people are born, and as children they're like, oh, when I grow up I want to be in prison. But often circumstances, situations they find themselves in, background, that's the path they know, and they don't have kind of other role models around them to help steer them or kind of have those boundaries that might take them in a different direction. So it's a really kind of important point to consider, I think, as well.
So I guess it's worth looking at the context here first before we talk about the work you're doing. So how big is this issue currently when it comes to prison leavers managing to find employment in the UK?
Well, at the moment, the stats are generally that around only about 17% of prison leavers find work in the first year of release. Yet employment is one of the biggest factors that reduces reoffending. And there's kind of this figure at the moment that I think people are doing a bit more research into, but the cost, the kind of social and economic kind of impact of reoffending mainly by unemployed people kind of costs the taxpayer at the moment about £18 billion a year, which is a significant amount of money. And obviously we know that employment provides so many different things to people. Like if we think about for what it kind of provides just us as individuals, We can have that sense of purpose and that social stability, like financially, a community. And those are just three things. And you think if people don't have employment and all they know is a life of crime, how are they going to change their life? How are they going to reduce reoffending? So for a lot of people, actually, when they come out of prison, often what they say is they do want work, whether that's voluntary or part-time or full-time. They want something to do to keep them busy and to use their minds so that they're not idle and twiddling their thumbs and going off and doing other things that they shouldn't be doing. So yeah, it's quite a prevalent issue, really.
So what are some of the obstacles then that kind of ex-offenders are facing when it comes to trying to enter the workplace?
I think there's some kind of more practical things. So for some people, they come out homeless, and that's a major obstacle, really. If you think one thing that we need to be able to have to ensure that we can work is a stable place to live and to feel safe. And so that's kind of a big factor. I think for others, it's potentially not having work experience. And so employers don't consider them because they don't have a CV, or on an application form, they don't have a history of employment like other people might have. For others, it is simply the fact they have a criminal record, and that employers won't even consider that because maybe the employer doesn't understand about what shows up on a criminal record and why. They don't understand what certain wording means that comes up on a criminal record, or they think because that person has a criminal record, their reputation, the business's reputation will go down, or that they can't have them work for them, or they are just afraid. There's like a fear and a lot of misconceptions around it. So that can be a barrier. But then for other people who are leaving prison, they don't have qualifications. And that doesn't mean they're not educated or that they're not bright. It's just that they left school at a young age, so didn't get qualifications. And so that can be a barrier because, again, employers say you need to have a degree or you need to have an equivalent qualification. And actually, a lot of people in prison don't have that, but they're very able to do the work, and they still have the same intellect as someone that does have a degree. So there's a kind of, those I suppose are more societal issues really that can be a barrier. And then I think if we look at some softer kind of outcomes or things that might prevent people, it's around self-esteem, anxiety, just not having work in the past, and so they don't believe they can actually be a kind of a good member of society going forward. It can sometimes be around the label they feel they have. So a lot of people that leave prison say they feel they've got this neon sign on their head that says, I've been in prison. And so there can be a lot of the internal things that actually can be a barrier or an obstacle for someone trying to find work as well.
I mean, you mentioned about on a job application form that little tick box about whether you've had a conviction. I mean, presumably that's soft discrimination, that you can't legally discriminate against someone because they've had a conviction. Is that correct?
Well, it's a tricky thing. So someone who has a criminal record, that's not a protected characteristic. So
right.
It's not one of the 10. So it's a really tricky thing. So people can, I suppose, discriminate, and they do. But if you feel kind of about the social responsibility that we have, people shouldn't. And I think with that tick box, there's still a lot of misunderstanding about when you really need to ask for a DBS check. And the majority of jobs out there, you don't really need to ask for one, or you don't even you don't necessarily need to consider it. I think it can be helpful for people to know, and legally, if someone has what we call an unspent conviction, they should declare it. But it doesn't always mean that a criminal records check needs to be done. So I think sometimes there's this kind of misunderstanding, and the kind of the history around DBS checks really is something that I only recently learned, and it's quite interesting. And that it originally was for judges to see if there was a pattern of offending behaviour.
Okay.
And that would determine the sentence that judge gave to that individual that was before them in court. But so that was really why they were kind of created, but they're now used for so many different things that they're not really needed for. So it's quite an interesting thing around that little tick box on an application form and what it's really asking, I suppose.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And also it's not really allowing for that shade of grey, is there? That you need in society. It's like there's conviction and there's conviction. Like, is it actually applicable to the role you're applying for?
Yeah, and I think it's also that, do you as an employer need to know on application, or can you wait until you've at least met the person, given them the interview, and decided whether you like them or not? And in Bristol, where I'm based, the council they kind of authorised ban the box. So if it's a job that isn't working with a vulnerable group of people, then they won't ask about criminal convictions on application. They'll wait till a later stage. And that means, therefore, people are having a fairer chance to at least get to interview stage before they're having to disclose. And I think it's then preventing that any bias, unconscious bias, coming up at application stage for those looking at the applications. And I would kind of encourage more people to consider not asking at application stage, unless it is obviously work with vulnerable people. And then it's really important that you know beforehand, just so you can make a decision of whether it's fair to put someone through an interview knowing they're not going to get the job or not, because you don't want to waste people's time either or give them false hope. So yeah,
absolutely. Although, again, going back to kind of purpose and self-identity, I mean, just going through an interview itself is a big experience for a lot of people, isn't it? And you're potentially denying someone the opportunity to demonstrate their value, aren't you, if you don't allow them to go through to that interview stage?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I'm sure all of us have read things in the news or whatever, and we've made a judgment based on information that someone else has written or someone has written about themselves. But when we meet someone in person, then we have an opportunity to just really see them and see them as, like, humanize them. And I think in interview, someone gets to really share about their transferable skills, what their values are, and kind of showcase their qualities and showcase their experience as well. And I think, you don't get that so much on CVs and application forms. Like, there's such an outdated way of doing things. And I think just on that subject, particularly for people who have been in prison, actually, if you think about, a lot of them would have left school early. Application forms and CVs are not tapping into their greatest skills. They're not able to really showcase who they are. So getting them through the door to interview can be the real time that they can showcase who they are and what they can bring to a business or to an organization.
I've got to be honest, I can say this now as someone who runs their own business, and touch wood, will never have to fill out a CV again. I don't think application forms or CVs are ever fit for purpose. I don't think you can ever convey the true sense of self that you are, what you can bring to a business on an application form or in a CV. I used to hate, both sides. I used to hate submitting my CV, but also when I used to recruit for roles, I used to hate wading through a sea of CVs, because it takes so much to stand out, doesn't it? And so, as you say, if you see something that's an easy tick box against someone, like a criminal conviction, and you're faced with 50 applications for a role, it's that easy way to sift, one would imagine, in a HR team.
Absolutely. And I think, and that's just a misconception straight away there, is that people will go, or if they've got a conviction, they're going to be harder to manage. They're going to be more difficult to have in the team. Whereas there's a few companies who I know who hire people from prison or have got criminal records, and they've said that people they've interviewed in prison have been more motivated and more capable than people they've interviewed who don't have a criminal record. And that actually, generally, people who you hire who've got a criminal record are going to be more loyal. They're going to be just as hardworking, even more hardworking, reliable, because I think they know that it's much harder for them to get a job, so they prove themselves more. Whereas people that don't have a criminal record, in a sense, we have a greater pick of jobs out there. So if we don't like the job, we can think, I'll just look elsewhere.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, so someone who's got a criminal record doesn't have that luxury in quite the same way. It's particularly not initially, not as soon as they've left prison. And so I think that even just for HR departments or people looking through application forms, I would encourage people, if they see the tick, to actually think, oh, maybe this person is going to stick around a bit. Maybe they're going to work hard. Maybe it's worth getting them through the door and just meeting them and seeing who they are in person rather than on paper.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk to me then about the journey that's led you here. So why did you choose to found your own consultancy to do this work?
That's a very good question, Ben, because I would say 2 years ago, the thought of being self-employed was one that just filled me with dread. And I think I remember saying, I'll never be self-employed. That's just the most ridiculous thing in the world. And I sometimes still feel that, actually. But I think what's led me to this, I've been working in criminal justice for about 13 years and started out as an assistant psychologist in a local men's prison, and then transitioned to being a probation service officer in the same prison. So my role kind of in both capacities was writing risk assessments on newly sentenced male prisoners to the prison. And so what I was seeking to understand was that individual's history, what led to them to commit the crime, and what was going to help reduce the risk of them reoffending again in the future, and having this dialogue with them and really seeking to understand who they were. And what I noticed, I suppose, is that a lot of them kept coming back. And there was this kind of going, this kind of cycle of reoffending. And I was thinking, there's something not quite right here. Like, if they shouldn't want to keep coming back to prison. Like that the culture of prison is just crazy. And I mean, I did that job for about 4 years and then moved away, came back, got a job actually as an employment consultant. So started to see the other side. And I was started to work with men and women who had criminal convictions. And then I was like, oh, this is why they go back to prison, because they can't get work. And it's not because they're not capable. It's just that people just aren't even getting them in through the door. And then I did that for a bit. And then I ended up working for a charity, Bristol-based charity called 61. And everything 61 does is around supporting people with criminal convictions in the community through long-term mentoring and through partnering with churches and individuals. And the churches, they kind of provide welcoming spaces for people with a criminal record. They're not all faith-based, but they're just a place of acceptance and welcome and belonging. And so I worked on the mentoring project for a long time. And again, I could see the men that I was working with wanting to get work, but just constantly that uphill battle to do so. Or they would get work for a bit, and then because of the restrictions maybe they were under, or their kind of internal struggles, the employer didn't necessarily understand, that individual didn't quite know how to communicate all of that, and the employment just wasn't lasting. And I think I saw then that gap. I was like, there's that gap there where employers or voluntary organizations don't understand criminal justice. They don't understand prison culture. They don't understand what people go through when they leave prison. And I thought, I do. Like, I worked in prison and in the community, so I've got that knowledge to speak into that and kind of educate people on all of that. And so I was able to reduce and change roles and reduce my hours at the charity, and then that freed me up to start the business.
Yeah, so you spot a gap, Esther, and you see that you're perfectly placed to fill that gap. But then there is the daunting and terrifying leap of actually setting up business yourself, which I know all too well.
Yeah.
How has it been the last few years of going solo?
So it's been just over a year. Well, officially launched actually last September, so just under a year, but kind of dropped hours with the charity last June. So having that kind of security, I suppose, of 2 days a week actually paid is really nice. So it's not quite so daunting, but I think it's been a steep learning curve. Having never done anything business related ever, it's kind of, I've just learned so much. And I think I have had to really be okay with rejection. And I think that's been a big thing, but also that building resilience of, no, I believe in what I'm doing, and I'm going to just keep kind of pushing and keep going with it, even though a lot of people I speak to maybe aren't ready to receive that information or that challenge that I'm maybe presenting. I think for me, where I've been on this journey over the last kind of year is, I do believe in it. I see that it's kind of needed. And I've just got to kind of plug in and keep my eyes fixed on the purpose of why I'm doing it. But it's definitely been an eye-opener into the kind of the pros of being self-employed, and then the challenges, I suppose.
Well, I guess if I can offer any kind of solace, it's 4 years into this now, and in many ways you couldn't have picked a worse year to have gone self-employed. So obviously the purpose is fantastic of what you're doing, and the wider context of why it's needed, I can't dispute at all. But it's been a very, very difficult 12 months for everyone I know, including myself, who's been self-employed. And one would hope that by the time this episode comes out, there's been an election and some sense has prevailed. But it's been a tough period, and I think the very fact you're here now having this conversation and you're still on this mission speaks volumes about the need for it. So how do you come in then to a company approaches you, a company is interested? Talk to me about what you offer at Myrtos.
So I provide kind of a few different workshops really, and they can all be tailored to the specific needs of a company. So I have a workshop that is just a half day that it really goes in depth into criminal justice. And so we look at the difference between spent and unspent convictions to really help employers and HR departments understand what they might see on a DBS check, what might come up on a DBS check and which ones will come up. We look a bit at the law behind it all, because I think it's really helpful to make sure that we're not being nosy and that we're only asking what we're allowed to ask.
Yeah.
I showcase as well the kind of things people do in prison, because I think the news will only tell us certain things, but actually there are so many transferable skills that people have. And so I really love to showcase that, but also showcase the reality of prison compared to community and some of the challenges people might face when they leave prison because of the culture and how the majority of prisons actually aren't set up to support people when they leave into the community. And so it can be a real shock. And then I put in a little problem solving challenge of something that people can do in prison to see if people can problem solve. And I have two options depending on who I'm kind of talking to. So that's kind of a half day workshop. And then the full day workshop is that, as well as more employment specific things. So how do you support someone to disclose in an interview? How do you risk assess? Looking at the psychology behind employment and why it's useful, looking at who you can hire. So there's a thing called release on temporary license, which is a day release scheme that certain prisons do, and that can be a really great way for employers to start exploring what it is to hire someone from prison.
So talk to me about how that works then. So that's so you'd hire someone by day and kind of test out how it goes on both sides? Almost. Yeah,
so you contact the kind of prison that's near you, and they do a vigorous risk assessment. So you kind of say, this is the job role. The prison will really risk assess that with you, with the probation officer, and they will kind of find someone who they think is suitable to work for you. And then that person gets released for the day. And if you've got 5 days a week that you can offer them, then they'll get released every day for that 5 days. If it's 3 days for that, and they will work, and you pay them a normal salary that you would pay anyone else. But the difference is that 50% of that salary goes into the victim compensation pot, so that victims can be compensated, which is a really great way of doing it. But then at the same time, that individual who is working can really start to save for when they get released. And if they then if there's no accommodation found for them, it actually gives them a chance to try and get private rent, because they would have saved enough for a deposit, which can often be a huge challenge. And then, the ideal is that on release, that person can continue working in that company, but it's given that employer the security to start taking someone on, knowing that there's been this rigorous risk assessment, that they've got the support of the prison and the probation officer if anything is to go wrong, and that if something goes wrong, that person doesn't have to continue working for them. So it's kind of a nice, I suppose, safer way, or gentle way.
I think that's amazing. I mean, how widely is that known about or utilized around the UK?
I think I feel, for me, maybe because of just working criminal justice, I feel it's known about quite a lot in specific industries. So I feel probably more in the construction industry. It's quite well used, potentially even a bit of hospitality, potentially. But I think there's definitely scope for it to go broader. I think it depends on, I suppose, for companies where the prison is, to whether they've got offices near enough. So the nearest one to me here is kind of South Gloucester. but there's an open prison in Kent, and a few others dotted around. And then some prisons who aren't what we call an open prison, they'll also do a release on temporary license as well. And the people will get dropped off and picked back up as well. So their commute is sorted. So I think it's definitely a really great initiative that companies can get involved in as well. So,
I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's really good. So, and then what was I talking about? Workshops. So, I do these like half day, full day. They can be done in like one chunk, or they can be done online over 4 weeks for just 2 hours a week. Because I get, people are busy. If they can't take a whole day, then 2 hours a week for 4 weeks might be more manageable. Also, just to let the information sink in. Like, you know what it's like if you go on a training day, you leave and your brain is just so full of information. You're like, don't even know what just happened to me. I kind of have this like out of body experience. So I kind of can break it down into bite-sized chunks. And then I've got a couple of other workshops that one is around just challenging and confronting people's biases towards people with a criminal record, really, and kind of showcasing again some of the skills. And then another one is really around dispelling fears and misconceptions. And that one I kind of wrote with staff members in mind who might be really worried that the company they work for is thinking of hiring people with a criminal record, particularly people who've been victims of crime or know people that have been victims of crime. I think it can be very overwhelming. And I thought having something that could facilitate a conversation for a team to actually talk about how they feel, but hopefully dispel some of those fears by looking at reoffending rates and looking at the risk someone might pose, that kind of might help dispel some of those things and enable a company to push forward with the kind of hiring people with a criminal record. So those are the ones that I offer, as well as one-to-one consultancy stuff.
And who do you tend to aim at? Is it kind of HR teams, or is it CEOs and MDs, or is it the whole team? Like, who typically attends your workshops?
So with the half day one, that's generally aimed at all members of staff, just so they can all have a better understanding. Because I think for me, the more that society can understand what it's like, then hopefully people's opinions will change. And then the way that we talk about people in prison, the way that we respond to people in prison will change. And then that's only going to help long term. The full day stuff is generally aimed at HR and CEOs and kind of hiring managers, people that will be managing individuals, interviewing them, again, so they can have that broader understanding of it. And then with the other two workshops, the smaller ones, just again, any member of staff really, or anyone who just wants to know a little bit more and kind of have their thoughts challenged a little bit. I think it can be quite healthy to have our thoughts challenged and have things held up to us that maybe are challenging what we think.
Yeah, and I think we're all guilty of this, aren't we? Like we're really living in a world that everything's so black and white. Everything's so you've got this view or this view, and it's almost like you form this echo chamber, especially online and social media, in terms of you're just having your own views played back to you.
Yeah.
And I think it's really powerful when you have opportunities to have your views challenged. And think a bit more about actually maybe your unconscious bias that you didn't realise you had until it's challenged.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well, we can often have a picture in our heads of what someone who in prison looks like. And just to even challenge that is, I think, can be quite helpful. And looking at the terminology that we use and how are we putting an identity onto someone, and therefore what is that doing to them? Because I think when we start labeling people, it's very hard for them to move on from that label. And there was some really interesting research done, which I broke down and kind of put little bits on my LinkedIn over like a few weeks, of the power of language. And actually it was done, the research was done on men in prison and exploring with them the power language had on their identity, on their future behavior, and on their kind of, I suppose, perceptions of them being able to get work. And it was really fascinating. They were talking about how being labelled an ex-offender actually restricted them internally from moving on, because they're like, well, if everyone believes that's who I am, then I may as well just continue acting as someone who commits crime or a criminal. And actually saying, if we can start talking about the person as a person who happens to have just committed this or done this or who has this, rather than that being their identity, then people are more able to be freed from that and move on into a different life and living a different way of life. So I think that's something I cover, just to try and help change the way that we think about people.
Yeah, and I mean, that's all about empathy, isn't it? And about actually meeting someone where they're at and understanding someone's perspective. I mean, did you find that that time you spent working as a psychologist inside for prison changed your views, having come from the legal system?
100%. Yeah, I think I remember when I first started working in prison, I just had this belief that, well, this is just what we do. We put people in prison. Like, that's just where people should be. And then the more I chatted with different men, the more I heard their stories and heard some of the awful things they'd been through. Like, I just had such overwhelming compassion for them. And I think probably a lot of that stems from my faith as a Christian as well, of kind of really trying to see people as God sees them, and actually trying to look at where is the good, where's the good stuff in here. Because I don't believe people are good or bad. I think we all do good things and we all do bad things. And it's trying to kind of understand, why did people go on the journey they went on? And actually, where's the good stuff that we can try and pull out of them, so that the negative stuff they believe about themselves that voice gets quieter, rather than being the louder voice. And I think when I did see people keep coming round, and even when I worked for the charity, my role was going back into the prison. And I'd see some of the same faces kind of 6-7 years later. And I was like, what are you doing here? And the kind of compassion I had for them grew even more, because it's like, you're so stuck, and this is your life and has been your life for so many years. And it's actually quite heartbreaking sometimes. When you think all of us are only really one stupid decision away from getting a criminal record. And, if some of our lives have been slightly different, or that one person hadn't come into our life, or that one friend hadn't said, I'm not going to let you do that. We could all have gone on a different journey. And I think that's what I learned a lot, is just seeing this going, oh, you shouldn't be here. Like, you're so much more than this.
Well, it's like, they often talk about, especially, where during tough times of the economy, like that most of us are only a couple of paychecks away from being homeless. Like, it doesn't take much. We all think we've got a very secure lifestyle, don't we? But actually, it doesn't take much to make a bad decision and for your life to be completely flipped upside down. And for some of these men and women, it's something that happened in the blink of an eye, and their whole life's changed. And unlike you, I don't think people should have to pay with the rest of their lives for mistakes they made.
And I think people still are, like, the system. There's been a lot in the news recently about the IPP sentence that used to be given is now not allowed to be given. Yet people that are still in prison and have never been released are not having that overturned at all. They're not even going to be resentenced. And there's some people that were given 17 months as a sentence, but with this indeterminate protection for the public, so IPP sentence, and they're still in prison 12 years later. And you just think that's not humane. And we just seem to, a lot of people are okay with people being forgotten about in prison. And I think as well, when we look at women in the criminal justice system, a lot of women end up in the criminal justice system because of the person they are with. And so they are doing things for their partner and then getting caught for it and taking the blame. And so a lot of women are inside because of coercion, manipulation, control, yet they're getting punished for that. And then they come out and they end up back in that relationship, and the cycle continues. And women would also be sent to prison for crimes that men will do and won't be sent to prison for. And so there's kind of a lot of disparities between it. And we know that for a lot of women, they've just been through so much trauma. And we have to work with women in a very different way to how we work with men in criminal justice as well. But again, I've met some incredible women through the work that I've done who are just a real force for good. But who, again, they're so like lacking in self-esteem and self-worth, that they stay stuck in this cycle. And again, that's just really heartbreaking to meet these women who just, they kind of give up on themselves a bit, and you kind of want to champion them and cheerlead them to say, come on, you can do it. Like,
Yeah. Well, you've got the right surname for that, haven't you? So
I have.
Yeah.
The pressure.
I mean, it's really clear from speaking with you, Esther, that you obviously, this is really going to your heart, this work, and you're taking a lot on every day from going through this. I mean, how do you find the balance in terms of this not becoming too much, because you're dealing with such a huge issue? How do you separate what you're doing in the day with, being able to actually live life? Yeah, because it's a tough subject we're talking about.
Yeah, I think it's been something I've had to really learn over time. And I haven't always got it right. And that there was definitely times when I felt incredibly burdened because I wanted to do more and couldn't. And it wouldn't have been right for me to do more, because I think the kind of topic of empowerment is so important when you're working with people, anyone, not just people in the criminal justice system, but empowerment has to be really kind of at the forefront of our minds. I think recognizing that I'm not a savior, I can't fix people. People are not problems to be solved either. They're not projects. And that we sometimes just have to allow people to kind of make the decisions they're going to make, even if we know it's going to hurt them. I think I have work with an incredible team at the charity, and we come together kind of once a week, and we kind of pray together, and we kind of share the difficult stuff and stand by each other in that. And I think having a really supportive network is important, just to kind of say, this is what I'm struggling with, and people reminding me, Esther, you're not there to save, and you can't solve all the problems. Like you're a cog in this bit, and you can do that bit, and then someone else can do that bit, and someone else can do that bit. That's always like a good thing. And then I think, as I kind of mentioned earlier, my faith, just kind of having to trust God in it all and go like, God, you're bigger than me, you're bigger than this, and there's so much I don't understand, that I may never understand, but I have to trust that you have it all in your hands, and you love each of these people that I meet, and I have to trust that you're going to do something in their lives, even if I can't see it. And again, that just trying to hand it over to God and say, I can't do it, you need to do it. I can only do what I can do. But it kind of, the theory behind it sounds really great and easy, and then in practice there's definitely been these times that have been really tough, and I've just gone, I don't want to work in criminal justice anymore because it's too hard, because I'm not seeing any change. And then I have that reality, well, if I don't know anything else, so I don't know what else I'd work in, because this is all I know.
I guess that's the thing, talking about journeys. I mean, what you're doing is the very epitome of long haul journey, isn't it? I mean, this is nothing about this is going to change overnight. This is such a slow grinding wheel to progress, isn't it? And it's just inching day by day. Yeah,
it is. And I think, something I didn't mention earlier when you asked how I kind of got to starting the business is that I think the journey for me working criminal justice started when I was a child. And I grew up in a very privileged household, both wonderful parents, worked, church background, and our neighbours, though, the first neighbours, when we moved into the house, our first neighbours stole our car and burnt it out. So that was a great start to moving to the neighbourhood. And then our second lot of neighbours, they struggled with substance misuse, and they used illegal drugs, and they drank a lot of alcohol. And the youngest son was a year younger than me, and he would often come and stay with us, and he became like a little brother to me. And the police were around quite a lot, trying to deal with situations in the house. But I saw the way that my parents just loved them. They just loved this couple, and they didn't agree with what they did. They didn't encourage or support that, but they loved them. And they were firm but fair. So if we were looking after the son and they came back way later than they were meant to, my parents would have a conversation with them about that. And it would be like, we're really happy to have him, but if you say you're going to be here by this time, we expect you to be here by this time. You know, it's about respect. And I think I witnessed that love, and that obviously planted a seed of so many other people could have rejected that family and gone, you're bringing the police to this neighborhood, your behavior is not okay. But my parents just said, come to our house, come and sit with us, come and have a cup of tea, come and have some food. And that obviously put something in my heart, because I can't think otherwise why I would have got involved in criminal justice. And so I know I've been on a journey as a child of probably trying to figure that out, of what does that mean, and how have I ended up here? But that's my earliest memory of, I suppose, being confronted with people that were struggling with addiction.
Yeah, I guess it's, I think that's a big part of faith as well, isn't it? That being a voice of the voiceless, that kind of championing people that can't champion themselves. And I think it's it's really interesting what you were kind of exposed to, and obviously what you saw through how your parents acted with them, and what that and just shows what that's gone on to what you're doing now. It's incredible.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, really. I mean, I think, what you said as well about some of the challenges that we can face when we're kind of self-employed and trying to do our business. Like, I think for me, I always try and remember, like, why have I started this in the first place? Like, what's the purpose? And one of my biggest hopes that I think I keep reflecting on is that just one day there will be those equal opportunities for people who have got a criminal record to get work, or to volunteer, or to get housing, or to get insurance, because all of those things get affected. And that is what can help keep me going when things are tough, or when I see people struggling. I just think maybe just one day, or if there's just one more employer or one more voluntary organisation that is kind of prepared to take that risk. It's just kind of keeping going on that journey of like, just keep going.
Well, I really, really hope, I mean, we said this off air before you came on, but I really, really hope that someone out there in my audience is listening to this, that this resonates, that there's someone who owns a business or is in HR or is in training who wants to pick up the phone to Esther and get in touch. Do we still pick up the phone these days? Probably send you an email. Yeah.
I mean, email, phone, whatever.
Pick up the phone. What was that? That was a relic from the past, wasn't it?
Send a fax. No, don't send a fax. I don't have a fax.
Carry a pigeon, send her something. But get in touch with Esther, because I think, I hope this conversation has helped to just ask a few questions and maybe reconsider some views. And I'm so excited to see where this consultancy goes for you. And we'll have to do this again in the future and see how things have moved forward and how the landscape has changed. How can my audience connect with you, Esther? What's your website and what are your socials?
So the website is www.myrtosconsultancy.com. So quite straightforward. And you can just find me on LinkedIn, Myrtos Consultancy, or under my own personal one, Esther Champion. Just get in touch if you just even want to have a little chat about, the realities of it, without committing to anything. I love having a chat. If you're in Bristol, we can meet in person, have a cup of coffee. I love that too. So I'm just really open to any kind of conversation, and just, people just asking questions and wanting to know more is the first step, really.
Yeah, well, I love this. I mean, my whole business is all about helping good people do good, and I think that's very much at the heart of what you're doing here. So I think it's awesome, and just keep up the great work.
Thank you very much.
Keep journeying, as I always say.
Will.
So look, that is it for another awesome Good Journeys. Thank you so much, Esther, for joining me on the show and for all you're doing. Thank you to everyone who has joined us today and shared time with Esther and I. When it comes to podcasts, you are spoilt for choice. So very much appreciate you coming along for the Good Journeys ride. Biggest thank you as always, to my producer, Jeff Easton from Tall Oak Productions, for bringing this Good Journey to life. This show relies on you, so please follow the show, join in on social media using the hashtag GoodJourneysPod, and share this episode with a friend. So that's it for today. I've been Ben Veal. My special guest has been Esther Champion from Myrtos Consultancy. This has been Good Journeys. So until next time, let's keep climbing together. See you all again soon. Bye.